Hello and welcome to Missouri Legislative Update. This month we bring you our show from the floor of the Missouri Senate. In this month's show, we bring you the sights and sounds from the last month of the 2012 legislative session. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Jennifer Yapel. After working for several months, lawmakers concluded the second regular session of the 96th General Assembly by passing more than 100 measures, which now head to the governor's desk. On the final day of session, Senate leaders took a moment to sit down and discuss the 2012 legislative session with members of the press. Senate Communications correspondent Dred Scott has more.
Shortly after the final gavel fell, Senate leaders held a news conference to discuss their efforts and several pieces of legislation passed by the General Assembly. The list includes the approval of the state's fiscal year 2013 state operating budget and measures that would make it easier for students to transfer college credits, protect religious freedoms, bring lawmakers' retirement benefits in line with state employee packages, add further requirements for child care providers, reform sentencing guidelines, expand the state's do not call list to include cell phones, secure veterans funding for veterans' homes, and enable the Show Me Heroes Act, a measure aimed at helping military families and veterans entering the workforce. Senate Majority Floor Leader Tom Dempsey of St. Charles says lawmakers were also successful at impacting public policy, which he says would improve the business climate in the state.
We passed two bills very early, and we were able to put those on the governor's desk. Unfortunately, he vetoed the bills, but we continued to work. And on workers' compensation, by addressing the co-employee liability, we addressed a serious problem in the state of Missouri.
Senate leaders also highlighted their approval of the fiscal year 2013 state operating budget, which funds vital functions of the state, such as K-12 education, higher education, social services, and law enforcement. Senate Minority Floor Leader Victor Callahan of Independence and Senate President Pro Tem Robert Mayer of Dexter discussed the General Assembly's efforts in the face of difficult budget times.
We worked together with the governor and others, and we have once again put Missouri in a position where, unlike other states, we have avoided many of the other crises and disasters that other states have faced financially.
It's been a tough budget year, but I think through the efficiencies that we found and making the reductions where necessary and living within our means, this is a budget that Missourians would believe that we've done a good job on.
Lawmakers will return to the Capitol for their annual veto session held in September later this year. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dred Scott.
The Missouri House wrapped up the last regular session of the 96th General Assembly with a flurry of activity. Following the final gavel, lawmakers met with members of the press to discuss the 2012 legislative session. As the papers fell on the 2012 legislative session, the Speaker-elect declared the session a success.
I think we can say that for the Missouri House, it was promises made and promises kept. We're very happy with our success.
Lawmakers sent more than 75 House bills to the governor's desk during the legislative session. While the majority proclaimed the session a success, members on the other side of the aisle had a different perspective on the legislative session.
We needed to do two things at the beginning of the year. One was job creation. The second was fix the funding formula for education. Neither one of them got done.
When it comes to creating jobs in the state, House leaders point to legislation aiming to protect employees and employers from workplace lawsuits. Lawmakers sent legislation to the governor's desk stating employees will not be held liable for a co-employee's workplace injury for which compensation is recoverable under the state's workers' comp laws. Jones also points to legislation reviewing rules and regulations placed upon Missouri businesses as a way to help the state's job growth.
We reduced them here in Missouri by requiring administrative rules to be reviewed every 5 years, ensuring every rule and regulation on the books is not a burden to our businesses.
Lawmakers also point to the passage of the state's $24 billion budget without raising taxes as one of the session's successes. The approved budget aims to fully fund the state's veterans' homes following a legislative agreement passed by both chambers. It also allocates an additional $5 million for the Education Foundation formula, and it reverses the governor's proposed $100 million cut to higher education. Overall, Jones was pleased with the 2012 legislative session.
We could always hope to do more, but being in an election year, I am actually standing here very pleasantly maybe a little surprised and very excited about everything we accomplished.
Lawmakers will return to the state capitol on September 12th for the annual veto session. The Missouri House gave its final stamp of approval to the state's 2013 operating budget. Lawmakers finally approved the $24 billion budget after intense negotiations with the Missouri Senate. Lawmakers on both sides of the building were finally able to come to an agreement regarding the state's 2013 operating budget. The final budget includes an additional $5 million for the Education Foundation formula, and it reverses the governor's proposed $100 million cut to Missouri's colleges and universities. It also includes funding for the hotly debated blind healthcare program, and the budget provides a 2% raise for state employees making less than $70,000 per year. Overall, the Speaker is pleased with the final product.
I think if you look at the vote totals, had overwhelming bipartisan support that invested in our priorities, that balanced the state budget, that held the line on taxes. I think it, by anybody's measurement, was one of the most successful weeks we've had in the House in several years.
Lawmakers estimate the state will have between $7 and $8 million left over in fiscal year 2013. The budget also aims to fully fund the state's veterans' homes, following a legislative agreement passed by both chambers. On the other side of the aisle, one lawmaker states the budget gets the job done, but could have done more.
You can play a really good game and still lose the game. But it was a good game. We played fair, we played well. Are there things in there I would like to see differently? Absolutely.
The chief complaint from the minority wasn't the budget itself, but the need to address the lack of revenue. Overall, several budget items stick out to the budget chair regarding the 2013 budget.
The way that we were able to restore the funding to higher education, I think, is certainly a victory. That we were able to maintain the additional $5 million for elementary and secondary education is certainly a victory. There's some other things, the pay raise, I think, has been very important to a lot of state workers around the state.
The budget now heads to Governor Nixon for his approval.
Missouri senators passed several measures that would affect the judicial branch of the state government. Senate Communications correspondent Dean Morgan takes a closer look.
Of the more than 110 bills to reach the governor's desk this year, 4 were particularly relevant to the way courts could operate in the future. Senate Bill 628 is a measure that would modify several provisions relating to the judiciary. The bill would create the Joint Committee on Child Abuse and Neglect, a panel that, in part, would devise a plan for improving the decision process for removal of a child from a home, determine the additional personnel and resources necessary to adequately protect children and improve their welfare, address the need for additional foster care homes, and improve the quality of care provided to abused and neglected children in the custody of the state. The measure would also address drug traffickers, juvenile court procedures, and potential changes to the state's sex offender registry. Lawmakers also give final passage to Senate Bill 636, which also relates to the judiciary. Sponsor, Senator Joseph Kevney of St. Louis, says many of the provisions contained in Senate Bill 628 can also be found in his proposal.
Senate Bill 636 is my judiciary bill that we spoke about the other evening. Senator from the 8th and the senator from the 1st had some concerns about it. We've addressed those, and I think we've got everything squared away.
Another measure is Senate Bill 755, which would enact the House of Worship Protection Act. The proposal states a person would commit the crime of disturbing a house of worship by using profanity, rude or indecent behavior, or making noise, thus disturbing services there. A person also would commit a crime by intentionally injuring, intimidating, or interfering with any person exercising the right to religious freedom or who is seeking access to a house of worship. Another proposal now on the governor's desk is Senate Joint Resolution 51, which would let voters decide if Missouri should modify the composition of the Appellate Judicial Commission and the selection process for judges to the Missouri Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. During debate on the resolution, Senator Jason Crowell of Cape Girardeau tells his colleagues he does not want a one-term governor to be able to stack a commission whose goal it is to pick potential judges.
I have no problem whatsoever letting citizens dominate the commission instead of the way that it is now where lawyers dominate the commission. All right? Right now, it's 4-3. 4 lawyers and 3 citizens.
If signed into law by the governor, provisions contained in Senate Joint Resolution 51 could be on the November 2012 ballot, and Senate Bills 628 and 636 would take effect August 28th upon the governor's approval. Reporting from the Missouri Senate, I'm Dean Morgan.
The Missouri House gave its final stamp of approval to a proposal changing the way judges are selected in the state. Supporters claim the proposal brings more accountability to the state's process for selecting judges, while opponents say the legislation gives the governor unchecked power. The Missouri House narrowly approved a proposed constitutional amendment changing the way judges are selected in the state. The resolution changes the makeup of the commission in charge of selecting judges for the Court of Appeals and Missouri Supreme Court. Under the resolution, the governor has the ability to appoint 4 of the 7 members on the commission.
To allow there to be accountability.
Supporters claim the proposal introduces accountability into the process of selecting the state's judges.
The governor will be held accountable for those decisions that they make if SJR 51 is adopted. Lawyers will no longer control the system.
The resolution also increases the number of judges submitted by the commission to 4. Also, the proposal removes the Supreme Court's voting member on the commission and replaces it with a non-voting advisory position.
It is radical destruction of the judiciary.
However, opponents claim the proposal destroys the current system of checks and balances.
He will have the power, as will all governors after him, if this radical anti-law bill is passed, to appoint anyone he wants to the panel that will select the Supreme Court judges, etc.
The Missouri House narrowly approved the resolution with only 84 yes votes. The constitutional amendment must be approved by the voters in November before becoming law. Up next, the Missouri Senate aims to make Missouri's roads safer, and lawmakers tackle several issues affecting the future of the state. That and more after the break on Missouri Legislative Update.
The first step to getting into college is finding someone who can help. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Welcome back to Missouri Legislative Update. Measures pertaining to education are always among the top priorities for lawmakers during each legislative session, and this year was no exception. With the closing and unaccreditation of several schools in Missouri, lawmakers worked on a way to bring quality education to all students in the Show Me state. Senate Bill 576 would allow charter schools to operate in unaccredited districts throughout the state, as already allowed in the St. Louis City and Kansas City public school districts. Charter schools are educational institutions that receive public money from the state, but are not subject to some of the rules, regulations, and statutes that apply to other public schools. During floor debate, Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal of University City offered an amendment that would open up a provision in the bill that gives charter schools the option to limit admission based on gender if the school is a single-gender school.
I have a concern that certain students would not receive the same education as other students. And my concern has been the fact that girls are not doing as well in math and science as boys.
Her amendment was defeated, and after further debate, the measure was sent to the governor days before the end of the legislative session. Upon his approval, it will take effect August 28th. Another bill passed by the legislature this year addresses numerous provisions relating to education. Senate Bill 563, sponsored by Senator Bob Dixon of Springfield, would, among other provisions, require the Board of Missouri Higher Education Savings Program to study investment plans of other states. Create the Higher Education Capital Fund, which would allow the General Assembly to provide matching funds throughout the appropriations process to public college or universities for certain capital projects. Establish the Missouri Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Initiative within the Department of Higher Education to provide support to promote interest among K-12 students in these areas of study and increase the number of students who enter these fields at Missouri's public higher education institutions. Certain sections of this bill contain an emergency clause, meaning they will take effect upon the governor's signature. Finally, Senate Bill 599 received the General Assembly's stamp of approval and has been delivered to the governor. The legislation contains a provision that would require school districts to show in their annual school accountability report card their status regarding their state-approved gifted education program. Language that would allow students in grades 9 through 12 to learn cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and a provision adopted in a previous measure sponsored by Senator Brian Munzlinger of Williamstown, which would require the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to provide staffing support for career and technical education programs, such as FFA.
Programs that teaches people life skills. I mean, when you get done with that, you know how to balance your checkbook. And unfortunately, a lot of kids nowadays can't balance a checkbook or do a balance sheet or anything else. And I think that's very important, you know, as we look at our society and our economy, and when you hear people getting in trouble with their credit cards and things like that, that is very important.
If approved, Senate Bill 599 would take effect August 28th. To see these and other measures relating to education delivered to the governor, visit www.senate.mo.gov and click on the Truly Agreed Bills under the Legislation tab. Several Senate bills dealing with various modes of transportation in the Show Me State were approved by lawmakers and now moved to the governor's desk. Senate Communications correspondent Dred Scott has more.
In an effort to keep Missourians safe while traveling on the roadways, lawmakers passed Senate Bill 568, a proposal that would change Missouri's current move-over law to include emergency vehicles operated by the Missouri Department of Transportation. Right now, Missouri's move-over law only applies to law enforcement or emergency vehicles displaying light red or red and blue lights.
Mr. President, this bill is basically extending the move-over language, which has been a very popular and a very safe piece of legislation that this body did years ago, and this basically allows for MoDOT workers to be in that same category. So if we have a MoDOT worker out there with the lights, yellow lights or white lights, the move over language would be adopted to them where they would also be under that.
The new provision found within Senate Bill 568 would amend the move-over law so that drivers must take the same action of safely moving over into an open lane if possible when approaching MoDOT vehicles displaying amber or amber and white lights. Lawmakers also approved a measure aimed at improving intersections throughout the state by addressing the timing of traffic light signals. Senate Bill 611 would require MoDOT to make the run times for yellow lights at intersections the same throughout the state. During debate, Senate Minority Floor Leader Victor Callahan of Independence asked the bill's sponsor if this would be a new standard for MoDOT.
What I'm getting at is, do they specifically in that, the bill instructs them to shall conform to regulations promulgated by the Department of the Department shall establish minimal yellow light change interval for traffic control signals. What I'm getting at is, do they currently have that in their rules, or is this something new?
If signed by the governor, the new minimal yellow light change interval standard would be established in accordance with nationally recognized engineering standards. Lawmakers also approved changes to Missouri's law regarding motor vehicles and outboard motor titles in Senate Bill 480. The measure, among other provisions, prohibits the creation of out-of-state collegiate or university specialty license plates for Missouri motorists. The bill only allows community colleges or other institutions of higher education located in the Show Me State to authorize its official emblem for use on specialty license plates. All of these transportation and motor vehicle measures now head to the governor's desk for his approval. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dred Scott.
Lawmakers approved several measures relating to health and senior services this session. The bills now await the governor's signature to become law. Senate Communications correspondent Daniel Clote has more.
During the last day of session, the legislature approved Senate Bill 749, which protects employers and healthcare providers from being forced to offer certain healthcare services that are contrary to their religious beliefs. Senator John Lamping of Ladue filed the measure in response to recent developments regarding the Federal Affordable Health Care Act. Certain members of the minority caucus initially opposed the bill, but later worked with supporters to craft a compromise. Senator Jolie Justice of Kansas City discussed the process on the Senate floor.
And we came up with a compromise that is something that the majority of Missourians can live with. Was it a huge victory for folks in my camp? No, it was not. But you know what? It was something that we can all live with, and it's an example of how this body can work.
Another bill passed out of the legislature this year would require certain pain management techniques be performed only by licensed physicians. Majority Floor Leader Tom Dempsey of St. Charles sponsored the bill in response to recent medical mishaps that resulted in patients being injured.
We appoint the Board of Healing Arts to oversee the practice of medicine and take care of these issues. There were a few patients who were severely injured in Rolla from someone doing these injections. The board told the supervising physician that he could not delegate these procedures to his nurse because it was not within their scope of practice. Unfortunately, regulatory barriers in the judicial system prevented the board from enforcing this position.
Also approved this session was Senate Bill 689, which adds undue influence to the types of acts that constitute the crime of financial exploitation of the elderly or disabled. Under the bill, anyone who uses their authority over an elderly or disabled person to take advantage of that person could be charged with the crime of financial exploitation. This change will help law enforcement bring charges against perpetrators by expanding the law to include those who don't cross the line into outright deception or intimidation during financial exploitation crimes. Once approved by the governor, Senate Bill 682 and 689 would take effect starting on August 28 of this year. Senate Bill 749 contains an emergency clause, meaning it would become law immediately following the governor's signature. Reporting for Senate Communications, I'm Daniel Clote.
Agriculture is Missouri's top economic driver, and this year lawmakers approved several measures geared toward agriculture, animals, food production, and outdoor resources. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more.
Mr. President, this is, I guess you could call it the Omnibus Ag Bill, the short version.
Sponsored by Senator Mike Parson of Bolivar, Senate Bill 631 would address several key areas pertaining to agriculture in the state. Among other provisions, the bill would require the State Board of Education to establish standards for ag education that may be adopted by private schools. This would allow private schools in Missouri to apply in order to host a local chapter of Future Farmers of America, or FFA, a National Agricultural Education Association. Senate Agriculture, Food Production, and Outdoor Resources Committee Chairman Senator Brian Munslinger of Williamstown says FFA courses are valuable for all students.
FFA is such a well-balanced program. We've got some private schools that would like to have it. Currently, right now, they can't. But with the little change that we make, they can do it, and it won't be any cost to the state.
Other provisions found within Senate Bill 631 include language protecting the rights of 4-H and FFA students to show livestock, raising the truck weight limits for milk distributors, making changes to Missouri's grain dealer laws, and creating the Agritourism Promotion Act. Another provision found within the bill would require anyone who videotapes or records what they suspect as animal abuse on farms or ranches to provide the recording to a law enforcement agency within 24 hours.
This all it does is it requires you turn it in if you see animal abuse or animal neglect, similar to what the child neglect or abuse laws are. You still get to maintain the tape. Nobody takes it away from you. You can do whatever you want with it after that.
Lawmakers also passed Senate Bill 566, which addresses the vaccination of dogs and cats against rabies. The measure was sponsored by Senator Dan Brown of Rolla, who is also a practicing veterinarian. The bill states that if a person suspects that he or she has been exposed to rabies through contact with a dog or cat, that the owner must show documentation of rabies vaccination or else surrender the animal to authorities.
If there is a bite exposure, this gives us clear pathway to deal with the problem. Okay.
Both Senate Bill 566 and Senate Bill 631 now head to the governor's desk for approval. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
When we come back, we'll highlight some of the members of the Missouri House who are term limited, making this their last session in the General Assembly. Also, a new bust honoring a notable citizen of the Show Me State has been inducted to the Hall of Famous Missourians. Stay tuned.
Good nutrition can lead to great things. Find out how a healthy lifestyle can help your child succeed.
Welcome back. The final gavel of the 2012 legislative session marked the last for several term-limited lawmakers. In this next story, we sit down with several of those members to get their impressions on the time they spent in the Missouri House. As the 2012 legislative session came to a close, several lawmakers said goodbye to the Missouri House. 25 lawmakers will not be eligible to run again due to term limits. Back in 1992, voters approved a constitutional amendment limiting time in the Missouri House to 8 years. For one termed-out lawmaker, it has been an experience of a lifetime.
It's really been one of the greatest honors I've ever known, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. At the same time, I'm ready. I'm ready to move on to the next chapter.
Lawmakers are allowed to serve a total of 16 years in the General Assembly, 8 per chamber, and for many, those 8 years fly by.
I really enjoyed my ride here. It's been a great 8 years. I can't believe how fast the 8 years have gone by. You know, I mean, it goes by so quickly, and it seems like you're here and poof, you're gone.
During his time in the House, Day has focused on veterans issues. It isn't uncommon to see a bill dealing with veterans issues to have his name attached to it.
Whenever I first came up here, I've served on the board of directors at Farm Bureau for 13 years, and I thought I would be an ag representative. It just seemed a natural flow to go into veterans with Fort Leonard Wood in my district. And we have a lot of great ag folks here. They don't need my help.
As both lawmakers look towards life outside of the Missouri House, they both offered some words of wisdom to incoming lawmakers.
Down here, we get twisted and turned and pressured to vote certain ways, do certain things. Remember the people that you represent. And that's what I always try to remember. I've thought many times, not one person in this Capitol has voted for me in most of my elections.
Whenever you walk in the door, you have nothing but your word. And if you ever lose that in this building, you're pretty well toast.
However, current lawmakers aren't done yet. Members of the Missouri House and Senate will return to the state capitol on September 12th for the annual veto session. Speaker Steve Tilley inducted civil rights activist Dred Scott into the Hall of Famous Missourians. Lawmakers, family members, and others were on hand to witness the unveiling of Scott's bust. Born a slave, Dred Scott made history when he sued for his freedom. The case made its way through the Missouri court system before ending up in the U.S. Supreme Court. The country's highest court ruled against Scott, but he was emancipated shortly after during the Civil War. During his address, the speaker claimed Dred Scott was someone more than a court case.
Today I ask that everyone see Dred Scott not just a name from a famous court case or a symbol for a chapter in our nation's history that I'm so glad that we're far beyond, but instead simply a human being. Because after all, that's what Scott wanted to be perceived as.
Following the Civil War, Scott lived out his days in St. Louis working as a porter. The bust took more than 60 hours to design, according to Spencer Schubert, the sculptor. One of the challenges facing Schubert was the limited number of pictures of Scott, but that didn't stop him from capturing the emotion of Scott's life story.
So it's important to have a nod to the anatomy, but really capture the civil rights icon that is Dred Scott and the entire story and the dramatic challenging of authority that he did to make his name.
Scott's bust will now join Walter Cronkite, Stan Musial, and others in the Hall of Famous Missourians. And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House, you can visit our website at www.house.mo.gov. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And if you have any questions about the legislation in the Senate that appeared in this program, please visit www.senate.mo.gov. There you'll find the contact information for the 34 members of the Missouri Senate, as well as a link to the Senate's newsroom website. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next edition of Missouri Legislative Update.